Shabbat Shalom. I learned yesterday about an activity that I would just love one day to do. Perhaps some of you have heard of it. Most in the circle where I was having this conversation had never heard of black water rafting. Probably most of us are familiar with white water rafting, but black water rafting is something completely different. It is done in almost no places in the world. And to get to the most famous place to do it, you have to go all the way to New Zealand. There, in the Waitomo glowworm caves, you can raft in complete darkness, surrounded by inky blackness, with just enough help once your eyes adjust to see what is considered to be one of the world's great wonders, which are the glowworms that live far beneath the surface and illuminate the caves under Waitomo Forest. There is a way to do it without rafting, where you actually turn on your lights and you are in a cave, and it looks like a plain cave ceiling. In the main taverns, the stalactites and stalagmites are supposed to be extraordinary. But if you just turn on a headlight, all you see is the plain top of a cave. It's only in the darkness, in the absolute blackness, that you can start to see the wonders of God's creations. That's not in keeping with our patriarch Jacob. Jacob was a person who, as Robert Frost said, was acquainted with the night. It's a poem I'll share in a couple of minutes. Jacob was a person who was acquainted with the night, who only in the darkest of the midnight hours was able to see what was truly in store for him. He was able to see the magic of the night. Right after our Torah section for today concluded, at the beginning of chapter 46 of Genesis, we read, "And Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. And God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and said, 'Jacob, Jacob.' And he said, 'Hineni, I am here.' And God said, 'I am God, the God of your father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of you a great nation. I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph shall put his hand upon your eyes.' And Jacob rose from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. And they took their cattle and their goods which they had got in the land of Canaan and came into Egypt. Jacob and his progeny with him, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his progeny brought he with him into Egypt." Jacob is the patriarch that is acquainted with the darkness. He has a number of meetings with God during the night, and I want to thank especially the teachings of Rabbi Sylvia Rothschild, a British lady rabbi. There aren't that many. She writes, "The first was the dream on the road out to Haran when Jacob was running away from Esau." Remember that one? "And a ladder appeared to him that joined heavens to earth, and God delivered a reassuring message. The second experience of the night was the dream, of course, at the ford of Yabok, when he was returning home to Canaan, wealthy and secure, but incredibly terrified about the reception he would have from Esau, his brother. And now here, a third time, God appears in the middle of the night to reassure him that he will return from Egypt and become a great nation. It reads a little strangely, for we know that Jacob will die in Egypt. As a nation, they will only leave after 400 years of time, having survived a long period of slavery. But we might read into it that the time in Egypt will be a short respite during the famine. Why? Does God think that Jacob will not cope with the reality of what his descendants will face? Is this vision one that emanates from Jacob's need for support rather than being a real meeting with God? Is God responding more to the young Jacob that God first met, the frightened young man who was still confident enough to tell God that only if God fulfilled the promises made in the dream would he finally believe, rather than to the older man whose world is shaped by the loss of his older son, who has been frozen in grief since that time, this young son by his beloved wife Rachel? Or was the story perhaps added into the narrative later to support the enslaved Israelites and comfort them in their suffering? We have no answers. Just as we have no answer for the interchangeable use of the two names Jacob and Israel. They really jump off the page there. It's so powerful and so cryptic in this passage. But all the encounters Jacob has with God during the night, this vision is one that we can really hold on to today. It provides reassurance in times of uncertainty, reminding us that we're just one link in a chain that goes all the way back into history, and please God will go forward into a future we cannot know. The Meshech Chochmah, the Midrash on Genesis 46:2, points out that what is different about Jacob than the other patriarchs is that Jacob was ready and willing to live in exile. And so have we really been living in an exile. Despite the miracle of the state of Israel, we all live in a kind of spiritual exile. We are black water rafting through life. No matter how many lights we turn on, we still come from a place of doubt about what really is the true enlightenment that we all need. Rabbi Rothschild suggests that we are the children of Jacob, so much more so than the children of Abraham and Isaac. Jacob was his own self, a mixture of self-assurance and anxiety, wanting to believe but not being too sure about it, prepared to do a deal with God when it seemed an expedient action. Very few people believe with certainty that in the darkest night there is still a light out there. Very easy to succumb to the darkness. But fewer still come to belief through their own experiences. Doubt is very present in the Jewish character. It makes its way through all of our narratives and our prayers. We even pray in an aspirational way. We hope to be able to believe rather than actually asserting that we do. Whether God ever speaks to Jacob in the night or whether Jacob creates the experience for himself really is almost irrelevant. What's important is that Jacob is able and willing to create such an encounter or to believe it when it comes. It is all that is asked of us too, to be able and willing to be open to the presence of God, to the light of the glowworms, even when times are at their darkest. We are each of us in our lives acquainted with the night. We all walk in a kind of darkness. And I'd like to close with this poem by Robert Frost. It was one I was not familiar with until yesterday, and I thank my beautiful friends in my Friday Challah circle that has sustained me so much through this pandemic for introducing it to me. This is a modern poem, a poem of the 20th century, but in some ways I think we can all relate to it. We are all in the nighttime, waiting for the dawn to come, and if it doesn't, how will we find our way through? What will light our way in the darkness? Acquainted with the Night by Robert Frost. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one, acquainted with the night. Like our namesake, Israel, we are the children of one who is acquainted with the night. The Jewish people knows what it is to walk in darkness, holding continually to the light of faith and to the light of hope. May we always do so. Shabbat shalom.